How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Ches, Daf 58 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, today we begin the sixth parak of Masechta Zevachim, parak Kodshei Kodshim. I think it's an interesting daf. We have it was an interesting daf because I put together some diagrams which are interesting because they're original pieces of work. These diagrams, because, okay. We basically kind of two topics on today's daf, which are somewhat melded together, and they are slaughtering sacrifices on the Mizbeach. Of course, we've been talking about slaughtering sacrifices in the Azar, not on the Mizbeach, but on the floor. In the north of the Azar, the entire Azar, Kachim Kalb. So we're going to discuss what if you should slaughter a sacrifice on the Mizbeach. And then we discuss the location of the Mizbeach, and that kind of gets interesting. And as I said, they're kind of like melded into each other, these two topics. So we're already going to, pretty early on, discuss the location of the Mizbeach, whether it's in the north of the Azara, the south of the Azara, the middle of the Azara, and different things like that. So I actually kind of made my own original Beis HaMikdash diagrams in order to show this stuff. So that was kind of an interesting exercise there. So hopefully it will be an interesting daf. Friends, let us jump in. All right, friends, we're going to begin on Daf Nun Ches of Masechta Zevachim, all the way at the top. Fresh new parak. Says the Mishnah, Kodshei Kodshim Sheshchoten Berosh HaMizbeach. Okay. So as I mentioned in the introduction, whereas until now we've been discussing slaughtering a korban on the floor of the Beis HaMikdash, not on the Mizbeach, but on the floor. How else do I describe it? Like, not on the floor. On the floor sounds like everyone's lying down on the floor, but kilu, not on the Mizbeach, like just on sort of ground level. Why don't we say that? On the ground level of the Azara. And now, what if somebody walks up the ramp to the top of the Mizbeach and slaughters the korban there? So, so if somebody slaughters Kodshei at the top of the Mizbeach, and normally, of course, Kodshei would have to be in the north of the Azara. What if somebody slaughters the korban on the top of the Mizbeach? Rabbi Yossi Omer Ki'ilu Nishchatu B'Tzofin. Okay, so it says Rabbi Yossi, it's as though the Kodshei were slaughtered in the north of the Azara, i.e. kosher. Kodshei, as we know from Perek Ezim Mekomen, Shchitosam B'Tzofin, need to be slaughtered in the north. Says Rabbi Yossi, that one who slaughters Kodshei on top of the Mizbeach, it's Ki'ilu Nishchatu B'Tzofon, all good. Rabbi Yosef Bebuda Omer says, Rabbi Yosef Bebuda, Mechetzi HaMizbeach V'La'adarim Kidarim, Mechetzi HaMizbeach V'La'tzofin Kitzofin. So it says Rabbi Yosef Bebuda, well, if the korban, let's just say it's a korban ola. If the korban ola was slaughtered on the northern half of the Mizbeach, well then, the korban is kosher. If the ola was slaughtered on the southern half of the Mizbeach, then it's possible. So we divide the Mizbeach, the top of the Mizbeach, in half. There's a north side and a south side. Says Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, if the korban ola was slaughtered in the north side of the Mizbeach, so it's kosher. If it was slaughtered in the south side of the Mizbeach, well then it will be possible. And of course, it wouldn't just be by korban ola, it would also be by a chatas in asham, right? All kodshei kodshim. Let me just chap a shtickle water, and then we will continue with the Gemara. Now says the Gemara, Omer of Asi, Omer B'Yechanan. Okay, says Vasi B'Yechanan. Omer Hoy Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Yossi would say, Kule Mizbeach Batzofin Koi. Okay. So it says of Asi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Omer Hoy Rabbi Yossi. The Rabbi Yossi would say, Kula Mizbeach Batzofin Koi, that the entire Mizbeach was in the north of the Azar. Umay Ki'ilu, and what does it mean? That is as if it's in the Mizbeach. So, okay, meaning, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, Kachi Kachim Shchita Kachi Kachim Shechchatem B'Rosham Mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi Omer Ki'ilu Nishchatu Batzofin. It's as if it was slaughtered in the north of the Azar. But so says the Gemara. Now I have his little diagram over here, just in case anybody was having a hard time visualizing it. We're going to need more diagrams later. This one, arguably, maybe you need it, maybe you don't. It's good to visualize it anyways. So there, if you have the Azara, you see on the left kind of the Ulam and the Heichal and all that stuff, and then you see the Mizbeach over there to the right. There's a little dotted line dividing the Azara in half. There's the northern half to the top and the southern half to the bottom. So it says Rav Asi Amar Yochanan that Rav Yossi would say that the Mizbeach was in the north of the Azar. So now the question is, if the Mizbeach was in the north of the Azara and you're slaughtering a korban on top of the Mizbeach that's already in the north of the Azara, so why is Rabbi Yossi saying in the Mishnah that it's as though he's slaughtering it in the north of the Azara? The Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. Of course he's slaughtering it in the north of the Azara by definition. So again, Amar Vasim, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yossi would say, Kul Mizbeach b'tzofin koi, that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. So why does it say it's as if he slaughters in the north of the Azar? He's in the north of the Azar. So well, as we know, a kachim is supposed to be slaughtered al yerech amizbeach tzafona, to the north of the Mizbeach. That's, of course, as we've been discussing, on the ground level of the Azar, to the north of the Mizbeach, between, let's say, the north of the Mizbeach and the wall of the northern wall of the Azar, in between the Mizbeach and the wall of the Azar, to the north of the Azar. That's where the kachim needs to be slaughtered. And in this case, it's not a Yerech HaMizbeach Tzafona, it's on top of the Mizbeach. So Kamash Malan, it's okay. It's as though, even though it's not to the north of the Mizbeach, it's on the Mizbeach, it's okay. And we treat it just as the same way as we treat it if one were to slaughter a korban in the north of the Azar. Omar le Reb Zera Ravasi. Very interesting. So now, Reb Zera, okay. So Reb Yochanan was saying, Omar Reb Yossi, that Reb Yossi would say that the Mizbeach was in the north of the Azar. Now Reb Yochanan was saying this because he had a tradition that was Reb Yossi's opinion. You see, because, Reb Zera, he's thinking that why is Reb Yochanan saying that according to Reb Yossi, the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar? Reb Zera thinks that Reb Yochanan is saying that because Reb Yochanan looks at the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says that according to Reb Yossi, when you slaughter a korban at the top of the Mizbeach, it's as if you're slaughtering it in the north of the Mizbeach. Reb Zera says, okay, so Reb Yochanan looks at the Mishnah, and he says, okay, Reb Yossi is saying that when you slaughter a korban on top of the Mizbeach, it's as if it's in the north of the Mizbeach. It must be that Reb Yochanan is looking at the opinion of Reb Yossi and saying, well, if Reb Yossi is saying that the korban that's slaughtered at the top of the Mizbeach, it's as though it's in the north of the Mizbeach, it must be, why does Reb Yossi say that? Because it must be that the korban, that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. Reb Zera isn't assuming that Reb Yochanan has a tradition that this was Reb Yossi's opinion, that the Mizbeach is north of the Mizbeach. Rather, Reb Zera assumes that Reb Yochanan looked at the Mishnah, saw that Reb Yossi says that slaughtering a korban at the top of the Mizbeach is as if it's though in the north of the Mizbeach. Therefore, it must be that Reb Yossi holds that the Mizbeach is in the north, of the Azar. But says Reb Zera, if that's the case, well then the next part of the Mishnah, where Reb Yossi Reb Yehuda says that, well, if you slaughter a korban where he divides the top of the Mizbeach in half, and he says the northern half of the Mizbeach, if you slaughter a korban there, it's kosher. If you slaughter it in the southern part, right, a kachim, like an ola, for example, in the southern part in the southern half of the Mizbeach, it's possible. Well, if we're drawing conclusions based on the opinions in the Mishnah, well, then the conclusion that we'll have to draw for Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, therefore, is that the Mizbeach is smack in the middle of the Azara, and that half of the Mizbeach is to the north of the Azara, half is to the south. I have another diagram for that as well, depicting that, right? You have that blue line going through the Azara, and you have the Mizbeach right in the middle of it, dividing the Mizbeach in half. The northern half, right, the top half of the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara, the bottom half of the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara. And therefore, if we're drawing conclusions based on the opinions in the Mishnah, so if Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda is saying that when you slaughter the Ola on the north half of the Mizbeach, it's kosher, and on the southern half of the Mizbeach, it's possible, it must be, therefore, that's because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds, we will conclude, that the Mizbeach must be halfway, right in the middle of the Azara, as we see in the diagram. Okay? So so it says Rabzera to Avasi. So if we're drawing conclusions based on the opinions in the Mishnah, where they must respectively hold the Mizbeach is in the Azara, well then Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda hachinami dechetzu batzofin v'chetzu badarim. So it must be that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda therefore holds that the Mizbeach is right in the middle of the Azara, 50% in the north of the Azara, 50% in the south of the Azara. V'chitema hachinami. If you say, yeah, punkt, bidiyuk, that's exactly Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The problem with concluding that is, but you, Rav Asi, had said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Modi Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda admits, Shem Shchoton Kinegdon Bakarka Psula. That Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds that while at the top of the Mizbeach, if one slaughters this Korban Ola on the north half of it, it's kosher, the south half of it's possible. But if you would snap your fingers and the Mizbeach would disappear and you would drop 10 amos to the ground level and do the same thing there and slaughter the Korban on what would have been the top half of where the top half of the Mizbeach was, it would be possible. And if you're going to say that the Mizbeach, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, is smack in the middle of the Azara, halfway, right, half to the north, half to the south, well then, if you snap your fingers and the Mizbeach disappears and you slaughter the Korban Ola in what would have been the north of the Mizbeach, that's in the north of the Azara. So why would you say that it's possible? Again, backing up two lines, v'chitema achinami, if Rav Asi, you are going to say that yes, let's conclude based on Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that he holds that the Mizbeach is right in the middle of the Azara. Half in the north, half in the south. Well then, va'atu do'amar, but you, Rav Asi, had said, Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan, name Rabbi Yochanan, Modi Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda admits, she'im shchoton kinegdom bakarka, that if you would slaughter the Korban Ola in the same exact place, but on ground level, psula. It's psula even if you slaughter in what would have been the north of the Mizbeach, but on the ground level. So, on my lay, Achikam Rabbi Yochanan, so therefore it says Rav Asi to Reb Zera, you're misunderstanding. It's not that Rabbi Yochanan's looking at the Mishnah and looking at the opinions of Rabbi Yossi and looking at the opinion of Rabbi Yossi and therefore concluding it must be that Rabbi Yossi holds that the Mizbeach is in the north of Azara. No, that's not what it's about. It's not about, the Mishnah is not talking about, where Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda hold the Mizbeach is located. That's not what our Mishnah is talking about. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan says, Shnei mikra echad darshu. Simply, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda are arguing about how to interpret a pasuk. V'zavachta olav, they will slaughter on it, on the Mizbeach. Right? This pasuk is Mizbeach Adama Taiseli. And you will slaughter on the Mizbeach es olasecha ve'es shlomecha, your olas and your shlomims. Rabbi Yossi suffer kula la'ola v'kula l'shlomim. Rabbi Yossi holds you can slaughter a korban ola anywhere on top of the Mizbeach. You can slaughter a korban shlomim anywhere on top of the Mizbeach. And it will be kosher regardless of where the Mizbeach is. The pasuk says, you can slaughter olas on top of the Mizbeach regardless of where the Mizbeach is. Whereas Rabbi Yossi understands the pasuk as saying, when it says, well, if you can slaughter your korban ola anywhere on the Mizbeach, and a korban ola is kachim kachim, which is more specific, it needs to be in the north of the Azar. And if we're going to say that an ola can be slaughtered anywhere on top of the Mizbeach, well then obviously a shlomim, which is only kachim kalim, certainly it can be slaughtered on any part of the Mizbeach. So then why would you need to say anything about shlom? Why do you have to say es ola secha ve'es shlomecha? If you could slaughter an ola anywhere on top of the Mizbeach, well then just say es ola secha and obviously ve'es shlomecha. Rather, what it must be saying is that the olas, rather chetzel ola v'chetzel shlomim. What it's saying is that half of the Mizbeach is kosher for slaughtering olas, i.e. the northern half of the Mizbeach, and the other half, the southern half, is kosher even for shlamim. So it has nothing to do with where in the Azara the Mizbeach is. Right? It could even be that the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, and even so, right? Because we're saying that if you would do the same thing on the ground level of the Azara, it would be possible. Because the Mizbeach, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, is actually in the south of the Azara. And therefore, if you would slaughter the korban on the ground level in the south of the Azara, it's possible. But the pasuk says, however, if you do this on top of the Mizbeach, v'zavachta olav es olasecha, that you're allowed to slaughter on top of the Mizbeach in ola, so long as it's in the northern half of the Mizbeach. It's a gzeres hakosov. That's what the pasuk says, regardless of where the Mizbeach is in the Azara. Because if it would enter your mind, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, that you could slaughter the korban ola anywhere on top of the Mizbeach, right? Kosher. Obviously, if the top of the Mizbeach is entirely kosher for the ola, certainly it's entirely kosher for the shlom. Why do you have to say ves shlomecha? The idach itzrich, whereas Rabbi Yossi disagrees. And he says, no, you could slaughter the korban ola anywhere on top of the Mizbeach, according to Yossi. We say it's kilu, it's the north of the Mizbeach, kilu, of the Azar. Kilu, says Rabbi Yossi, you could slaughter the ola anywhere on top of the Mizbeach. Okay. Well, then why do you then have to even mention anything about the shlom? Isn't it obvious that you could slaughter the shlom anywhere? It's kachim kalim. Well, here's the thing. I may have thought, look, ola who did dochik le mokim, the thing is, friends, as we know, a korban ola, which is kachim, needs to be slaughtered in the north of the Azar. Kachim kalim can be slaughtered anywhere in the Azar. So I might think, look, an ola, which is kachim, which has a more limited place where it could be slaughtered. So therefore, maybe if we just say ola, I'd say, okay, fine. So ola, which is a kachim, it's a limited place where it can be slaughtered, it has to be slaughtered in the north of the Azar, that could also be slaughtered on top of the Mizbeach. But shlamim, where there's plenty of room to slaughter a korban shlamim anywhere in the Azar, you can go right, slaughter it anywhere in the Azar. So maybe you can't slaughter a shlamim on top of the Mizbeach. So kamashman that, no, also a shlamim, you could slaughter on top of the Mizbeach. Okay. So we saw in our Mishnah a machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda about slaughtering kachim on top of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi says you could slaughter kachim anywhere on top of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda says you can only slaughter it on the northern part of the Mizbeach. Reb Zera had a minute to say that let's conclude from there what they hold respectively about where the Mizbeach needs to be positioned in the Azar. No, it's not about drawing conclusions about where the Mizbeach is located in the Azara. They are learning out their respective opinions from a pasuk. Guf Amar Vasim Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so we had said a few minutes ago that according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, that while if you slaughter a korban ola on top of the Mizbeach, in the northern half of the Mizbeach, it's kosher. But if you would do the same on the ground level of the Azar, it would be possible. So, what does this mean in practice on the ground of the Azar? Ilema, Am Yisod, Am Sovev. If you mean to say that you're slaughtering the Korban Ola on the ledge of the Yisod of the Mizbeach, or of the Sovev of the Mizbeach, right? I don't have a diagram for that, but we've seen this several times. Of course, on the Mizbeach, 1 amma up, there's the Yisod ledge, and then 5 amos above that, there's the Sovev, where, for example, the Kohen would do malika, what we'll do, let's say, the applying of the blood for the korban chatas, and the malika of a olas ha'of, for example, right? There was that sovev, that ledge. So maybe we're talking about if he slaughters the korban on those. So haiguva mizbeach, but that's just part of the mizbeach. It's not on the ground level of the Azar. V'od might connect them bakarka, right? What does it mean on the ground? So it's just the Sovev and the Yisod are just part of the Mizbeach, and it's not on the ground. So even if maybe he dug underneath the Mizbeach and he's slaughtering underneath the Mizbeach. But that if that were the case, then the Mizbeach would be puzzle. You can't have a Mizbeach with digging out trenches underneath it. Mizbeach Adam, right? Mizbeach Adama, Taisali, She'im Mechuber Ba'adam. It should be connected to the ground. You shouldn't have like trenches dug beneath the Mizbeach. Below Al Gabe Kifin, you shouldn't be building the Mizbeach on top of mounds and hills. Well, it could be talking about if you made the Mizbeach smaller, right? So let's say you made the Mizbeach smaller by 50%, and now you're going to slaughter a Korban Ola on the ground level of the Azara, where the north of the Mizbeach was, but the Mizbeach happens to be in the south of the Azara. So therefore, you're right now in the south of the Azara. The Korban Ola, or the Kachim would be possible. But if so long as the Mizbeach is built there properly, and you're on top of the Mizbeach, on the northern half of the Mizbeach, Rabbi Yehuda would say that the Korban Ola would be kosher. Efshir Isa Lehad Rabbi Yochanan v'lo taninu lo b'masnisin. So says Rabbi Zera Givaldig. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan had said that the opinion of, he says, Omer Hoyi Rabbi Yossi, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi is that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. So says Rabbi Zera, is it possible that Rabbi Yossi would have such an opinion, that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar, and it's nowhere to be found in the Mishnayos? Says Rabbi Zera, it must be that if this is Rabbi Yossi's opinion, it must be in the Mishnayos. It is my mission to find it. So again, Amr B'Zera says, B'Zera, Efshir, Isa Law, Rabbi Yechanan v'letaninu b'masnisin. Is it possible that Rabbi Yechanan, is it possible that what Rabbi Yochanan says, which is that Rabbi Yossi's opinion is that the Mizbeach is the north of Azar? If this is the case, then it must be somewhere in the Mishnayos, in the Shisha, Sidra Mishnah. Nafak, Dok ve'ashkoch. So Rabbi Zera was on a mission, and sure enough, he found Ditnan that the Mishnah says in Masechta Talmud, which is going to be one of the last, like Masechtas, I don't know if you could say, that we're going to learn in Seder Kodshim. One of the last things we're going to learn in Seder Kodshim is Masechta Talmud. Now, Ditnan that the Mishnah says Masechta Talmud, Beru Mishom. Okay, now on the Mizbeach, On the Mizbeach, there was the main pyre where like all of the korbanos would be burnt, and the olas and the emurim and all that stuff. But there was another pyre, a smaller pyre. And on that pyre, they would burn wood to make coals, so that there would be coals available to burn incense. And not just to burn incense, but also to burn the bazichin. Who can tell us what the bazichin are? Who can tell us what the bazichin are? So of course, every Shabbos, right, there was the showbreads, there was the lechem aponim. There were the 12 breads that would be stacked up on the shulchan in the heichel. In the heichel, there was the Mizbeach HaPnimi, there was the menorah, and there was the shulchan. And on the shulchan would be the 12 showbreads. And on top of the shulchan, there were 2 bazichin, 2 vessels, 2 spoon-like ladle kind of things that had frankincense in them. And every Shabbos, the showbreads would be eaten and swapped out with new showbreads. And before the showbreads could be eaten, the bazichin, these 2 ladles of frankincense, would be taken out to the azara, to the Mizbeach HaChitzon in the azara, and burnt on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And there was a special pyre there on the Mizbeach HaChitzon where there would be coals that would be taken into the heichel every day in order to be burnt with the incense on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and coals that the bazichin would be taken out to from inside of the heichel. They would be taken out to the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and the bazichin with frankincense, the frankincense would be burned on those coals on this second pyre on top of the Mizbeach HaChitzon. So now, the Mishnah says in Masechta Talmud, Beru Misham, that from the where they would store the wood, midira eitzim, from where they would store the wood, they would take atzeitena, fig wood, yafim, very nice fig wood, lisader ma'arocha shnia, and that fig wood would be burnt on the second pyre, on the smaller second pyre on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. The Seder Ma'arocha Shnia Shel Ketoris, and to make coals that would be used for the Ketoris. Keneged Keren Ma'arovas Dromas, and this pyre, now this is important, this pyre was in the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach. It's going to be a big shaila. This is going to be a big sugya coming up soon. But anyways, this pyre was in the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Moshuch min hakeren klapei tzofen arba amis, 4 amis up from the bottom of the Mizbeach. So this smaller pyre was in the southwest of the Mizbeach, but a little bit for 4 amis to the north. So not quite all the way at the southwest. It was at the south, but then up 4 amis from the south, 4 amis up to the north. Be'omer chomesh soyin gecholim, and they would put and burn on this pyre enough wood that they would estimate that you would get, that it would result in 5 sa'as worth of coals that they would be able to scoop from for use with the incense, to burn with the incense. U'v'Shabbos, and on Shabbos, when they would take the frankincense from the shulchan and burn that frankincense on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, on this pyre, so ba'omet shmonesayim, so they would burn enough wood to result in 8 sa'as worth of coals, so that there would be enough coal for the burning of the frankincense. Because the 2 bazichin full of frankincense from the lechem aponim would be burnt on this pyre on Shabbos. Umay si mono. And what was with all of these sort of details over here with the pyre and the location? So Rabbi Yossi, well, because the thing is that this Mishnah, whose opinion is this Mishnah with this pyre in the southwest and the 4 amas up to the north? It's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. The Tana that we learn in a Brisa, Rabbi Yossi Omer, that says Rabbi Yossi, Zesimin kol anitol bifnim linosin bachutz, that anything that was taken in the heichel, in order to be placed outside of the heichel, in the azara, on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, we're going to have to figure out exactly what this means. Einu nitan ela b'samuch she'en lifnim emenu. You're going to want to get that to be as close as possible to the heichel. V'chol hanitol b'chutz, and anything taken from the outside, linosein b'fnim, to be placed inside the heichel. Einu nital ela b'samuch she'en lifnim emenu. So also it's going to be as close as possible to the eichel. So meaning, there's this statement of Rabbi Yossi, which we're going to have to explain what it means, but basically, whenever you have something that you're taking from inside the eichel, and you're going to be taking it outside of the eichel, to the azara, to the Mizbeach HaChitzon, you're going to want to be placing it as close as possible to the eichel. And vice versa, whenever you're going to be taking something from the Mizbeach HaChitzon and bringing it into the Heichel, you're going to want to take it from a place on the Mizbeach HaChitzon that is as close as possible to the Heichel. Drink a little bit of water. So now, when it says Kol anito b'fnim linosim b'chutz, when we talk about something that's taken from the Heichel to be placed outside in the Azara, Maniyu, what are we talking about? Ilay Shirayim. If you're going to say, Rabbi Yossi is telling us about Shirayim, that when you have the Chatos Apnimios, for example, Parkoin Mashiach, and the blood is taken into the Eichel, and it's sprinkled by the Paroches, by the Mizbeach Azov, by Mizbeach Apnimi, and then whatever blood is left over will be taken out to the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And we're going to want to pour the shiraim on the closest possible place on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. But we already know this. The pasuk says, "El Yisod Mizbeach HaOla, El Yisod Mizbeach HaOla, Asher Pesach HaMoed." Right? We learned about that the other day. That it says Asher Pesach HaMoed. You want to pour the shiraim on the western wall of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, which is the closest part to the Moed. So we already know by the Shirayim that you're going to want to pour the Shirayim on the closest part of the Mizbeach to the Heichel. So Visu, and more so, when we're talking about something that's taken from the outside to be brought inside, Manu, what are we talking about? Maybe we're talking about the coals of Yom Kippur, that the Kohen Gadol takes coals from the Mizbeach HaChitzon and brings them in to the Kodesh HaKodashim to burn the incense on Yom Kippur. But again, we have a pasuk ready to tell us that he's going to take a shovelful of coals and bring it into the Kodesh HaKodashim. So what is Rabbi Yossi teaching us about? Nitol b'fnim linosim b'chutz. When we're talking about something that's taken from the heichel outside, shnei baziche levona shalechem upon. We're talking about the two bazichin from the showbreads on Shabbos. That the two bazichin filled with the frankincense would be brought from the azara, from the heichel, from the shulchan that was in the heichel, out to the mizbeach hachitzon to be burnt on the pyre, on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. The Gamre Mishiraim, that we learn from Shiraim, to bring them out from the Heichel to the Mizbeach HaChitzon, we want to burn it in the closest possible place. And Anito B'chutz Linosim B'fnim, and we're talking about things that are taken from the outside, brought inside. Gechalim D'chol Yoma V'Yoma, the Gamre Gechalim Shel Yom Kippurim. That's talking about every single day there would be incense that would be burnt in the morning, in the evening, and the coals would be taken from the pyre on from the pyre on the Mizbeach HaChitzon and brought in to the Heichel to be burnt on the Mizbeach HaKatoris, the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And that is also, you're going to want to have that as close as possible to the Heichel. Okay, fine. So this pyre, Be'etzem, the secondary pyre that was on top of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, we're going to want it to be as direct as possible, as close as possible to the Heichel. You drink a stick more water. And now we get into the whole shaila of what exactly it means for this pyre to be as close as possible to the Heichal. And we said that the location of the pyre was Dafka in the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach, but 4 amas to the north, and that's going to be the closest possible location to the Heichal. What exactly does this mean? Where was the Mizbeach located in the Azara so that these calculations would be accurate? Umay Kasavar, what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Right, Rabbi Yossi, who says that this pyre, we're going to want to have it, right, as we said, right, right, we said earlier, as close as possible to the Heichel. So if that's the case, right, and we're saying that this Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi, so where does Rabbi Yossi hold that the Mizbeach is located, is positioned in the Azar for all of these statements to be true? What does Rabbi Yossi hold? Ikasover kula Mizbeach bedorim koi esrim v'sheva boy lemeisi v'inam iksover kedushas heichel v'ulam chadi esrim v'tayte boy meisi. Sheesh. Let's read that again. Iksover kula Mizbeach bedorim koi. Okay, I have a slide over here. So, what you could see, okay, so what are we looking at in this slide? There's a lot going on in this slide. What are we looking at here? So, first of all, you could see where it says Heichel. So that's the Heichel. That is where, so if we're talking about, let's say, the Bazichin of the Lechem Aponim that are coming from the Shulchan that's in the Heichel. So you have the Heichel, and then on the way out from the Heichel, you have the Ulam. And then on the way out from the Ulam, you get to the Azar. So you have the Heichel labeled there, you have the Ulam labeled there, you have the Azar labeled over there. Okay. What else do we see? We also see a blue line right in the middle of the Azara. That's just, I added these lines just to show where things are. That blue line is smack in the middle of the Azara. What else do we see? We see that the Mizbeach is in the south. We're talking about where the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara. So it's just below, it's just touching that blue line to the south. What else? So we don't see this, but I'm telling you this. So there are two, if we're going from the Azara into the Ulam and then into the Heichal, you're going to walk through 2 doors. The first door to get into the Ulam is called the Pesach HaUlam. Now I'm telling you this, I didn't label it. I obviously could have, but I figured maybe I think it's okay if we just say it. The entrance to the Ulam is 20 amas wide, right? You can see in the diagram, right, that the entrance to the Ulam is larger than the entrance from the Ulam into the Heichel, okay? So now the entrance into the Ulam is 20 amas wide. The Pesach HaUlam is 20 amas wide. The Pesach HaHeichel is half that. It's 10 amas wide. Now, we have this blue line running right halfway through the Azar, smack in the middle of the Azar. And therefore running halfway through the Pesach HaEichel and the Pesach HaUlam, which means that half of the Pesach HaEichel and half of the Pesach HaUlam are in the north of the Azar, and half of them are in the south of the Azar. Okay. And therefore, if the Pesach HaEichel is 10 amas wide, and half of it is in the south of the Azara, so basically there's 5 amas of the Pesach HaEichel in the south of the Azara. Now, what else do we need to know? As we know, the Mizbeach is 32 amas square, right? It's a 32 amas square. Okay. Now, the Mizbeach was touching up against that blue line, up against halfway through the right in the southern part of the Mizbeach, of the Heichel. Of the Azar. So now the question is, where would this pyre, if we wanted this pyre to be opposite the Heichel, so then where would you want it to be? So the opening of the Heichel begins 5 amos right, southward of the of the halfway mark. Now, if we're saying that the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara, which means that it's touching the halfway mark, so the pyre, right, so the Heichel starts 5 amas below that, basically 27 amas into the Mizbeach, right? If the Mizbeach is 32 amas, is a 32 amas square, and it's touching the halfway mark, and the opening of the Heichel is basically opens 5 amas below the halfway mark of the Azara, so that's going to be 27 amas into the Mizbeach, right? So you could see, I have over there, right, I have a golden arrow pointing to a golden square. That golden square represents where the pyre would be on the Mizbeach. It's not perfect, but it's there's like a gold line that basically goes straight to the entrance of the Heichel. There's also a dark green line that goes to the entrance of the Ulam, which we'll get to in a second. But basically, that gold square represents where the pyre would be. It's not perfect, but basically where it would be on the Mizbeach if we wanted it to be right at the entrance of the Heichel. Basically, not in the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach, much more like the northwestern part of the Mizbeach. And again, it would be 27 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, because the Mizbeach is 32 amas, and the Eichel begins 5 amas to the south of the halfway mark of the Azara. So 32 minus 5 is 27. And even if you want to say that the holiness of the Heichel and the Ulam is the same, so we want to say, okay, fine, you know what, the opening, the Pesach HaUlam is bigger. Okay, so 10 amas of the Pesach HaUlam are in the south of the Azara. Okay, fine, so then 32 minus 10, and that's where you would have your pyre. But 32 minus 10 is 22. The Mishnah in Talmud was saying that the pyre is 4 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, not 22 or 27 amas up. I hope that was clear. I'm going to drink a little bit more water. So, right, so it says the Gemara, my kasaver, what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Ikasaver kulim Mizbeach b'darim koi, if the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azarim, Esrim v'sheva by say, well, if the Mizbeach is 32 amas, and it's right at the halfway mark of the Azara, and the Heichel opens up 5 amas below that, so 32 minus 5 is 27, so it should be 27 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, not 4 amas. And even if you're going to say that the Ulam is just as holy as the Heichel, so therefore we could work with the Pesach HaUlam and not just the Pesach HaEichel. So the Pesach HaUlam is 20 amas wide, which means that 10 of those amas are in the south. Okay, so 32 minus 10 is 22. Right, so Etzem V'Tarti Bo may say, but not 4. It would be 22 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach. V'kasover chetzio bat sofin, v'chetzio badorim, chad svei boy lemeisei, v'inami, kasover kedushas eichel v'ulam, chad milsei, shis boy lemeisei. So now, the next slide shows, what if the Mizbeach is smack in the middle of the Heichel, of the Azara, such that half of the Mizbeach is to the north, is in the north of the Azara, and half of the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara. Okay, well, if that's the case, the Mizbeach is 32, is by 32, which means that half of it is in the south of the Azara. So 16 amas of the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara. But now we get to the same cheshbon as we had before. Where does the Eichel start? 5 amas southward of the halfway mark. Okay, so what's 16 minus 5? 11. So if that's the case, well then the pyre would have to be 11 amas from the bottom of the Mizbeach. And if we say, okay, well, the Heichel and the Ulam are just as holy, so why don't we take into account the opening of the Ulam, which is 20 amas wide, 10 of which are in the south, so let's do 16 minus 10. Okay, but then you get to 6 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, not 4. And the Mishnah had said 4. So again, that would not work. So let's read that inside. V'inamik is over kedushas. Where am I? V'kas over. Right, the last thin line. If we say that half of the Mizbeach was in the north of the Azar and half was in the south, i.e., the Mizbeach was smack in the middle of the Azar, so half of it was in the north of the Azar, half was in the south of the Azar. Well, if that's the case, the opening of the Heichal, which is 5 amas below the halfway mark of the Azar, so that's where you're going to want to have your pyre. So 16 minus 5 is 11, not 4. And if you say that the ulam is just as holy as the heichel, and therefore 10 amas worth of the Pesach ulam is to the south, so therefore you want to do 60 minus 10, but then the pyre should be 6 amas up from the bottom of the mizbeach, not 4. So rather, it's that the entire Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. The Hani Arba Amis, Ami Yisod, V'Am Sovev, V'Am Mokum Kronus, V'Am Mokum Ragle, HaKran L'chimazgu L'kame Tfei Suleka Pesach. So rather, we'll read it again inside in a minute, but rather the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. So what happens is, okay, so the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar, Givaldig. So now, why is the pyre 4 amas from the southwest of the Mizbeach? Because where does the opening of the Heichel start? Well, now we're in the north of the Azar, so the opening of the Heichel is going to be 5 amas up to the north. Okay. Now, which means that where the Mizbeach starts, right at the halfway mark of the Azar, it's opposite the Heichel. Now, the thing is, the 32 by 32 of the Mizbeach includes the Yesod. Now, the pyre is not going to be on the ledge of the Yesod. There's also the Sovev. Now, the pyre is not going to be on the Amma ledge of the Sovev either. So you're already 2 amas in. Now, when you get to the top of the Mizbeach, there's, of course, the horn at the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. So now already you're 3 amas into the Mizbeach, into the 32 amas of the Mizbeach, and nothing is usable yet. It's the Yesod, it's the Sovev, it's the Karen, it's the horn. And then we're also going to need to have another amma of nothing there, just so that the Kohanim can walk around this pyre and be able to stand there, so it's not literally touching the horns. Now you have a 4th amma. And then you'll build your pyre. And the pyre will still be opposite the opening of the Heichel. If you would go even 1 amma further up, well, then it would no longer be opposite the Heichel. But because the opening of the Heichel is 5, goes 5 amas into the north, and we're going to build this pyre 4 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, it'll still be opposite the opening of the Heichel, and that is why the Mishnah in Talmud is saying that this pyre was 4 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, and this only works, argues the Gemara, if the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar, and we said that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. So says Reb Zera, I've found a source to say that Rabbi Yossi's opinion is that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. Let us read that inside. Rather, Rabbi Yossi holds that the Mizbeach is entirely in the north of the Azar. Vani arba amis. And what's the deal with the 4 amas up from the southwest? Amma Yesod. Well, 1 amma is the Yesod of the Mizbeach. V'ama Sovev, another amma is unusable because it's the Sovev of the Mizbeach. V'ama Makum Kronus. And then the 3rd amma is also unusable because it's the horn at the top of the Mizbeach. V'ama Makum Ragle Akanim. And now you also need another amma for the Kohanim to be able to walk over there, right between the horn and the pyre. And they were already 4 amas up. If you would bump it up another amma, well, then it would be 5 amas up from the Mizbeach. Well, then already you'd be past the opening of the Heichel, which basically only goes until 5 amas. If you build the pyre there, it's no longer opposite the opening. So by building the pyre 4 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, you still chaparain the opening of, right, it being opposite the opening of the Heichel. So the conclusion therefore is that Rabbi Yossi's opinion is that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azar. But says Rav Ada bar Ahava, wait a second. Maybe this Mishnah is not the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Hamari Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Ada bar Ahava suggests that maybe the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya of learned by Rabbi Yehuda, Omer says Rabbi Yehuda, Mizbeach memutza ve'omid be'emtza Azar. That says Rabbi Yehuda that the Mizbeach was in the middle of the Azar, 50% in the north, 50% in the south. V'shloshim amas hayilo, and the Mizbeach was 32 amas. Eser amas keneged pischo shel Heichel. Okay, so obviously 10 amas of the Mizbeach were opposite the opening of the Heichel. Achas eser amma mikan v'achas eser amma mikan, and then another 11 amas to the north, another 11 amas to the south. Nimsa. So it turns out Mizbeach mechuven keneged Heichel, so that the width of the Mizbeach was aligned, right? It was parallel to the width of the Heichel. Fine. So I have another diagram over here to show what we just read. So in this opinion, this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mizbeach is right in the middle of the Azar. The Mizbeach is right in the middle of the Azar. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yehuda had said that, therefore, the opening of the Heichel, right, the Pesach HaHeichel is 10 amas. Okay, so that will be, okay, those 10 amos aligned to, I guess, the middle of the Mizbeach. Now, if the Mizbeach is 32 amas, is a 32 amas square, and you take out 10 amas in the middle, so now 32 minus 10 is 22, divided by 2 is 11, so then to the north of the Pesach HaEichel, you have 11 amas. To the south of the Pesach HaEichel, there's 11 amas. That aligns, I have these two lines, right above and below the Mizbeach, there's like this golden line. That golden line aligns perfectly with the Heichel, because the Heichel itself was 20 amas and wide, and the walls around the Heichel were 6 amas wide each. So if you take the wall to the south of the Heichel and the width of the Heichel and the wall above the Heichel, so you have 6 plus 20 plus 6 is 32. So basically the Heichel, which was positioned, halfway in the middle of the Azar, and you have the Mizbeach, which is also halfway in the middle of Azar. The Mizbeach was a 32 amma square. The Heichel with its walls was also 32 ammas. So basically, the width of the Mizbeach aligns with the width of the Heichel. Now let's read that inside again. The Tanya we learned it by so Buda says Buda, Mizbeach memutza va'omed be'emtza Azar. The Mizbeach was in the middle of the Azar. V'shloshim v'shtayim amas ayu low, and the Mizbeach was 32 amas by 32 amas. Eser amas keneged pischo shel Heichel. Okay, the 10 amas in the middle of the Mizbeach align with the 10 amas of the Pesach HaHeichel. Achas esrei amma mikan, achas esrei amma mikan. Okay, then there's 11 amas to the north and 11 amas to the south. Nibsa Mizbeach mechuven keneged Heichel. B'kitzer, the Mizbeach is parallel to the width of the Heichel. But now says the Gemara, Sof Rabbi Yehuda chadsrei boy lemeisi v'ksav kedusha zeichel v'ulam chad amilsei shiz boy lemeisi. But says the Gemara, we've been here before. I don't understand. We already suggested earlier, what if the Mizbeach was halfway through the Azara? And we said, well, if the Mizbeach is halfway through the Azara, so then half of the Mizbeach is in the south, which is 16 amas, and the opening of the Heichel is 5 amas lower, so that's 11 amas. Or even if you want to say that the Heichel and the Ulam have the same level of holiness, so we want to take the Ulam, which is opens 10 amas further to the south, so 16 minus 10 is 6, not 4. We've been here before. So misovar hane arba amis ba'ade ami yesod ve'ama sovev arba amis bar me ami yesod ve'ama sovev. Says the Gemara. One second. You're assuming that the 4 amis includes the Yesod, includes the Soviv, like we were saying before, that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara, the first Amma is the Yesod, the second Amma is the Soviv. No, when we're talking about 4 Amas, it's excluding the Yesod and the Soviv. So when we say that the Mizbeach is 16 Amas, is halfway in the Azara, and 16 Amas are below, and if we want to include the the Pesach HaUlam, so then we get to 6, but that 6 includes the Yesod and the Soviv. When the Mishnah in Talmud is talking about 4 Amas from the bottom, it's excluding the Yesod and the Soviv, so therefore it could be like Rabbi Yehuda. So for Rav Ada bar Ahava wants to argue that the opinion in the Mishnah in Talmud is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Mizbeach is halfway in the middle of the Azara, and the 4 Amas are just excluding the Yesod and the Soviv. V'nukma Rabbi Yossi uv'memutza. Why are we assuming that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda? Why not say it's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi? And that Rabbi Yossi's opinion is that it's in the middle of the Azar. Mishum the Rabbi Yehuda shamaynu le memutza bedra, because we see explicitly that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that it's in the middle of the Azar. We don't see explicitly that this would be the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, but we see explicitly that it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, so we say that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Friends, we will stop here. That was Daf Nun Ches of Masechta Zevachim. And Daf Nun Ches of Masechta Zevachim, we began the 6th parak of Masechta Zevachim, Perek Kodshei Kodshim, and we discussed slaughtering sacrifices on the Mizbeach, not just in the Azara, but on the top of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi says anywhere on top of the Mizbeach is kosher. Kodshei Kodshim, Kodshim Kalim, anywhere on top of the Mizbeach, kosher. Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to Kodshei Kodshim, the north-south parts of the Mizbeach are like the north-south parts of the Azara, meaning if you slaughter, let's say, Korban Ola on the north half of the Mizbeach, kosher, but on the southern half of the Mizbeach, it will be possible. And then we had an interesting discussion about the location of the Mizbeach in the Azara based on a Mishnah in Masechta Talmud that described that the pyre for the coals for the Ketaris was 4 amas up from the bottom of the Mizbeach, and we're trying to figure out where the Mizbeach would have to be in order for that to be the case. We discussed, so Rabbi Yossi says that the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. Rabbi Yochanan had said that based on a tradition that he had heard, that according to Rabbi Yossi, the Mizbeach is in the north of the Azara. We tried to find a source for that based on this Mishnah in Talmud. Now Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that the Mizbeach is in the south of the Azara, because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, going back to what he had said in the Mishnah, that if you slaughter a Korban Ola on top of the Mizbeach, on the north half of the Mizbeach, it's kosher, but if you do the same thing on the ground level of the Azara, it will be possible because the Mizbeach itself is in the south of the Azara. And Rabbi Yehuda had said that the Mizbeach is in the middle of the Azara, and we had used Rabbi Yehuda to explain that Mishnah in Talmud, but basically Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that the Mizbeach is in the middle of the Azara. Friends, that was Daf Nun Ches, Daf 58 of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.